What's up, everybody? I am Marcus Grant. That is Michael F. Florio, and we are here to talk about 2022. I know, we're just finishing up the 2021 season. There's still a long time to go, but it's never too soon to start talking about the next fantasy football season. So we are looking at some of our top picks for every position heading into next season. So let's get started with right at the top, right? Who should be the 1.01, the first overall pick in 2022?
If you know me at all, this is not a surprise. For me, it's Jonathan Taylor. I mean, not only was he the best player in fantasy this past year, the RB1, scoring more than 80 fantasy or 60 fantasy points more than any other running back. He's young. He's a great talent. He's on a very good team with a good offensive line around, one that might actually be looking to upgrade their quarterback position as well. We saw that passing game where like Michael Pittman Jr. take strides this year. So Jonathan Taylor, we already know how good he is and just how great of a runner he is and how good he is near the goal line. I think with the situation around him potentially improving as well, he is just the safest bet, I think, to take first overall, and maybe even could reach another level if the offense around him gets any better, and if they decide to throw him the ball.
So I like that pick, and I have no beef at all with Jonathan Taylor. But, let's not forget about Derrick Henry and what he was doing before he got hurt this year. I mean, this is a guy who early in the season, there was a little bit of buzz around him about winning the NFL MVP. Obviously, the injury sort of derailed that. But he was on pace to catch as many balls, or at least close to as many balls as Jonathan Taylor did this year. He was on pace for nearly 2,000 rushing yards and maybe 20 or more rushing touchdowns. I mean, that's how good he had been at the beginning of the season. And unless there are some substantial changes made in the Titans offense, they're still really going to lean on him next year. What we love the most is the fact that they were throwing him the football. That was kind of the one part of his game he hadn't really had, because he hadn't showcased it to this point in his NFL career. But if they're really going to get him involved in the passing game, also based on what he can do as a runner, the fact that he's really not that old, he's about 28 years old, and until this year had never really missed time, has been pretty durable. Look, maybe you go Jonathan Taylor. I can understand that. But, if you're looking to kind of go away from what the consensus may be, let's not forget the guy who has been the king at the running back position for the last couple of years. All right, so that gets us to, though, our top 5 running backs for 2022. We know who your number 1 overall pick is. I'm assuming he's your number 1 running back as well.
Yeah, Jonathan Taylor leads off the list. I would take him first overall, so I would take him as the first running back. I think after that, it starts to be a discussion. For me at number 2, I would go with this year's number 2 in Austin Ekeler. I think just the fact that we know he's going to get the goal line work, plus with being in an elite offense with a really good quarterback, and he's going to catch a bunch of balls, I have him at 2. Number 3, Christian McCaffrey, who I know some people are shying away from because of injuries. He still remains, in my opinion, the safest bet to give you 25 fantasy points in any game when healthy. Then at number 4, the King Derrick Henry, who you just spoke up, Marcus. And at number 5, I'm going to believe in the Bengals offense and go with their RB1 in Joe Mixon. But there's a couple of names there that I considered at that number 5 spot.
All right, so we've got some of the same names, even if they're jumbled a little bit. So obviously, I've got Derrick Henry as my number 1 running back, just based on what we've seen from him the last couple of years and what he was putting on film this year before the injury. So we're going to go with King Henry as my number 1 running back. But after that, we are going to pivot to Jonathan Taylor for a lot of the reasons you said. I mean, look, I think there's a very narrow gap between Henry and JT. And so if you don't go with one, then you go with the other. Austin Ekeler, I've got at number 3, just because I got 2 guys ahead of him right there. I like Joe Mixon at 4 because I think he finally showed us what the ceiling looks like when they get him involved in the passing game. Now I'm going to go with Najee Harris at number 5 because the guy was pretty much lights out all year. Went all regular season without a fumble. Didn't have one until that playoff loss to the Kansas City Chiefs. And regardless of who the quarterback is going to be in Pittsburgh next year, I do think that Najee Harris is still going to be a focal point of that offense. And even behind a bad offensive line, he showed us that he can be an effective runner of the football. All right, speaking of quarterbacks, let's get to the first quarterback off the board in 2022. Who is that in your mind?
It is the quarterback one for the last 2 years, Josh Allen. Look, why mess with something if it's not broken? He was the QB1 last year, the QB1 this year, the first player since Dante Culpepper 15 years ago to finish as the top scoring quarterback in back-to-back years. He was the top scorer in fantasy points per game. And the way I look at it, He can give you elite production with his arm like many other quarterbacks can, but he's a better runner than those, and he gives you elite rushing production like other quarterbacks can, but he's a better passer than all of those good running quarterbacks. So to me, he's kind of just the best of both worlds, and I would take him as the first quarterback off the board.
So as much as I like that, I'm going to go with Patrick Mahomes. One, because it's been over 20 years, in fact, about 25 years almost, since we've seen a quarterback go number one or finish number one 3 years in a row. It's also been some time since the quarterback who was first off the board finished as the QB1. So Patrick Mahomes, for all of these struggles and all of the stories of what's wrong with the Chiefs offense, Mahomes is still a top 5 quarterback who still averaged about 21 fantasy points per game. He still has a ton of weapons around him in Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. This is an offense that is still one of the more high-powered ones in the league. And I think the difference is, in the latter part of the season, you saw Mahomes every now and then opt for the smart play. It's always a lot of fun to watch him run around and then make some razzle-dazzle throw, but a lot of times that was getting him in trouble early in the year, and he figured out late in the season maybe to be a little bit more conservative and sometimes take what the defense gives him. That, I think, opens him up for some big plays in the future. So meet the new boss, same as the old boss for me. It's Patrick Mahomes. So those are the guys throwing the football. Let's get to the guys catching the football. Who is your top wide receiver in 2022?
For me, this is a two-man race, and I'm going with Cooper Kupp here, but I know you're going to talk up another player. I can't argue that at all. But for me, I look at Cooper Kupp. He had 80 more fantasy points than any other receiver this year, the second receiver ever to top 400 in a season. He broke Jerry Rice's record. He is just the best receiving fantasy season we've ever seen. I think even if regression hits, he was so far ahead of everyone else that when it hits, he could still finish as the overall wide receiver one. I trust him and McVay and Stafford again next year to run this thing back. And I think Cooper Kupp, while I don't think he'll live up to his 2021 season, I think he'll have a very good season again in 2022.
So you say this is a two-man race. I'm going to take the other guy in the race, and that's Davante Adams. I mean, Cooper Kupp was absolutely amazing. Some of me feels like maybe this was a little bit of a magical season. Maybe not. But either way, Davante Adams continues to be as consistent as they come. And we saw even late in the year with Aaron Rodgers spreading the ball around to Allen Lazard, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, whomever else, that Davante Adams is still the focal point of this offense. And if Packers and Aaron Rodgers are able to come to some sort of understanding and 12 stays in Green Bay for a little while longer, then it only solidifies what happens here. But I do think even without Aaron Rodgers, whoever the quarterback is, would be dumb to not just target number 17 repeatedly. So maybe you are of the Cooper Kupp persuasion. I get it. If not, then Davante Adams is probably the next best choice as the top receiver drafted. So tight ends. We saw a changing of the guard at the top of the tight end scoring leaderboard. Mark Andrews takes over there. Does that influence whether or not he's the top tight end in 2022?
Yeah, I think he should be. I think it's going to be really close between him and a couple of others. Travis Kelce's been the unquestioned tight end one for years. Kelce's going to be 33 next year, and he's coming off of what is a down year for him, whereas Mark Andrews is just ascending. I mean, he was the tight end one this year in total points and in points per game. Since 2019, he is the tight end 3. He's been a top 6 tight end in 3 straight seasons, and his numbers only got better last year. He is clearly Lamar Jackson's favorite target, so I'm thinking he's the tight end 1. I would love to get him in the 3rd round, but Marcus, I wouldn't be surprised if some people start to pull him up into the 2nd round.
Yeah, I have a feeling he's going to bump up into the 2nd round, and he really was kind of the best thing, certainly the most consistent thing going in the Ravens passing game all year long. So I'm going to go back because a couple years ago, I said George Kittle was going to take over as the top tight end. It didn't quite happen, but I'm going to go back and I'm going to double down on that. And I'm going to go with George Kittle again as the number 1 tight end off the board in fantasy football in 2022. Now, obviously, a lot of why it didn't happen this year was some injuries kept him down, but still, when you talk about points per game average, Kittle was among the elites in fantasy football, and regardless of who the quarterback is, whether it's Jimmy Garoppolo or it's Trey Lance, they are going to get him involved in the passing game. He's going to get plenty of opportunity. It's just for Kittle, I think, a matter of staying healthy and staying on the field, because when he's out there, we know he's going to get his opportunities. He's a monster with great hands. He's incredible after the catch. And so I just think it's more about health and whether or not he can stay healthy. And that's going to be the difference in how he finishes. But I think even when he's been kind of beat up, he's still figured out how to be a top 5 tight end. So third round, I don't think that's too much asking for George Kittle. And I think the fact that he's been a little bit nicked up the last couple of years will keep that ADP at a relatively reasonable price for George Kittle. All right, so those are the top picks that we are anticipating for 2022. Let's get to the player you must have, the guy that maybe you're even willing to reach a little bit for just to get him on your roster.
Kyle Pitts. And I know earlier in the year I was like, oh, Kyle Pitts, he's not living up to our expectations. That was on us. Kyle Pitts did exactly what he was supposed to do, and that was be the best rookie tight end in recent history. He finished as the tight end 6 on the year. His 20% target share was 3rd amongst all tight ends. He had the 2nd most receiving yards by a rookie tight end in NFL history and the 4th most fantasy points. But if you look in recent history, he blew every rookie tight end out the water. The only thing for him was the touchdowns. The yardage and the catches were there. He had over 100 targets and just 1 touchdown. The only other player who could say that was Cole Beasley. And I looked at an average season for people with 100 targets. It's around 6 touchdowns. If you give Kyle Pitts 6 touchdowns this year, we're talking about him being the overall tight end 3 on the year. So I think that this guy is a lock to be a top 5 tight end next year. I think you could even make the argument he could be the overall tight end 1. I saw him go in an early draft in the early 4th round. I love the idea of getting him in the 3rd round, but I could see myself in August when hype starts to build around him, pulling him up to be like a late 2nd round pick.
Well, the hype's going to build, especially if the Falcons go out and they add some other pieces in their receiving core. Who knows? I think Matt Ryan will be back, but if they can get some other pieces around Kyle Pitts to take some of the attention off of him, I think the sky's the limit for him. I'm going to go with another rookie from this past year, and that was Ja'Marr Chase. And, we joked about how in the summer it seemed like Ja'Marr Chase apparently couldn't catch a football. He couldn't see it because there weren't stripes on it or something. And all he did was just obliterate defenses all season long, including just that ridiculous performance he had at the end of the year when he dropped a 55 on the Kansas City Chiefs. The ceiling for him is just ridiculous, and obviously he has that connection with Joe Burrow. And look, I would love to be able to wait till the 3rd round to get Ja'Marr Chase. I don't think that's going to happen. I think you're going to have to reach into the 2nd round to get him. But based on what he put on film this year and what we saw him do, it is probably worth that to get him on your roster as a wide receiver 1 because he has the ability to go kaboom at pretty much any given opportunity. Okay, we're going to talk some defenses here. I know we don't spend a lot of time talking about defenses, but it's still part of the game. So if you are of the mind to really go out and target a defense, who should be the first one?
I think it will be the Rams. I could tell you with certainty that it will not be the Dallas Cowboys because they were the top scoring defense this year. And we've never, since 2000 and we started keeping track of this, we've never had a defense go back to back as the number 1. To me, this is just a buying in on the Rams talent. Like Aaron Donald is so good. Ramsey, they got Von Miller now. We got to see who they bring back, but I'm just buying in on the talent that the Rams have here. That being said, I will not have them because I will not be taking the top defense in any draft. I'll be waiting and streaming.
I'm with you. I probably won't be getting a top defense, but if I were to go out and get one, I'd look at the Denver Broncos. And I know they didn't necessarily look great because their offense struggled at times, but this was one of the better defenses in the league. And wherever they go as their head coach, I do think that they are going to inherit a defense that can go out and make plays. And it's just a matter of getting their offense sort of on the same level. I think we saw it a few years ago with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers where they had a good defense, but you couldn't tell because Jameis Winston consistently put them in bad situations, so they ended up giving up a lot of points. I think similarly, if the Broncos can kind of get their offense to at least just be competent, then I think, they're going to be a situation defensively where they're going to be very, very good, and I wouldn't mind taking a shot at them as the first defense off the board. All right, so if we're talking defense, let's not ignore kickers. Kickers are people too, despite what everybody in fantasy football wants to say and try to get rid of them. So for those of you who are still kicker-minded, and I don't mind the position, who should be the first one gone?
I'm going to, once again, just buy in a talent here. I'm going with Justin Tucker. I know he didn't finish as the top scoring kicker this year. He was the kicker 7, 13 points behind the leader, but I still believe he is the best kicker in football. I mean, we saw him kick the 66-yarder to win a game. I think next year with the Ravens being healthier on offense, their offense will get back to what they were prior to this year, which likely means Justin Tucker, again, is one of, if not the best kicker in the NFL and in fantasy.
That doink off the crossbar might be the epitome of Lions football. Like, you feel like you have a chance, and then the most ridiculous thing happens to, like, get you to a loss. I'm going to go outside the box here, and I'm going to say Daniel Carlson. I mean, I get Justin Tucker, and I think that's a perfectly fine pick. I'm going to say Daniel Carlson. This is a guy who has been quietly one of the elite kickers over the last couple of seasons, getting it done just about every opportunity for the Raiders. Plus, I just have a feeling about this Raider offense that they are going to be okay, not necessarily great, that they can be a group that gets into the red zone, but maybe not score a ton of touchdowns. So that means Daniel Carlson should get plenty of opportunities, even in an era where NFL coaches love going for it repeatedly. I think Daniel Carlson has a really interesting shot to maybe be a guy that ends up putting up a lot of fantasy points for you. And people aren't going to think about it because they're going to go be Justin Tucker, maybe the Younghoe Koo route as well. So who knows? By the way, if you want fantasy goodness year-round, be sure to check us out on the NFL Fantasy Football Podcast. You can also subscribe and follow us on Twitter at NFL Fantasy. Plus, be sure to like and subscribe here on YouTube as well. Subscribe and download everywhere you can find NFL Fantasy goodness. By the way, before we go, I want to give a shout out to Lauren Day, one of the specialists who has been such a big help to us around here, whether it's on the podcast, the streaming show, even for VODs like this. She has been the backbone of what we do throughout the 2021 season. She's going to go over and crush it at Just Women's Sports. So we will miss you, but we wish you best of luck. We appreciate everything you have done for us. So best of luck to you, Lauren. Best of luck to you out there as well playing fantasy football. We are not done. Stick around. We'll got more coming up later this season.